All right. So, another video, another day. We're going to talk a little bit about telepathy today. The reason for that is because telepathy is actually on the rise with 2026 energy and everything that's coming in, everything that's being integrated. So, we're going to cover a little bit of like what telepathy actually looks like at an energetic level, how you might actually be picking up on some of this already, and what even to do with it. How do we have our own boundaries? I promise nobody's actually coming in to read your mind necessarily, but it can kind of feel like that when we're having certain experiences with this. So, being in 2026 is probably the first year I've really started to recognize some of that energy being really prominent in the collective consciousness. And that's interesting because normally at an individual level, we're kind of choosing that for ourselves to a certain degree. So, at the level that we are at now, energetically, it's actually allowing for telepathy to become more of a natural thing for us again. And I say that as again, because yes, it used to exist in ancient times, and it was a very natural way for people to communicate in those kinds of ways, especially when our DNA and everything was shifted and changed, and we were still connecting in those ways. So it's starting to come back into play again. And that is a part of our ascending into 5D. So, and it's funny because like I feel like people are like, well, is this a choice? Like, do I get to actually participate in this, or is I kind of just like a part of it? And I can see why it's a little bit freaky sometimes because we think, oh my gosh, I don't want everybody to have access to all my thoughts. And that's just not how it's going to quite work. I mean, obviously there's parameters around it and the free will of level of things as well as it's not going to be something that can be completely overrid override. I can't even talk already, I'm getting so excited. You can't override somebody's free will just to read their mind or their thoughts. Okay, so it's a little bit, it's at a lesser level right now as it's continuing to come back into our consciousness. So we're just going to touch on some of the things that might be sort of relevant, and then we'll kind of touch on what it actually could evolve into later into the years. So with starting with that, I actually thought it would be kind of fun to see if there was any cards that were going to fall out with this. And there actually was. And at a very baseline level, I'm not going to show these cards necessarily because really it's just some of the wording that they were trying to get across, not necessarily the card in total. But one of the first ones was the Horseman, which is Herald of Change. And it does feel rather fitting considering it feels like it's sort of like a magic trick in a way that's actually coming to life in our consciousness now, which is telepathy. um and some people want to say like is telepathy is related to telekinesis or those kinds of things, and I mean it's all just different frequency shifts, right? So telekinesis obviously takes a lot more energy to even have an actual physical object be moved. Is it possible? Absolutely. But it's also energetically a lot more taxing than telepathy would, because telepathy is actually very natural. It's natural to the world, right? I mean, so many dogs, animals, plants, they all use a type of telepathy to often be in communication with each other. It's often why a lot of people actually can't read animals very well, particularly dogs, because we're not very good at actually just analyzing energy and the energetic frequency that they're sending out, whether that be happy, mad, aggressive, dominant, whatever's going on, right? But they're almost always giving warning long before they ever make a physical move. So learning how telepathy is actually working, not just for us, but can actually be really helpful for the rest of us to be able to communicate more with the other things around us as well, the other living pieces, right? Whether that be plants, animals, especially other humans, all the other things involved with that, right? Because energy is our first language anyway. And telepathy plays off that as an energetic source. It's not necessarily like it's not new, okay? Like as you just mentioned, it's not new, but it might feel new to us again because it was something we became so detached from and sort of forgotten about. And again, black holes everywhere we could go into talking about a lot of these things, but at the same point, it was once more a forgotten thing, okay? So as we were moving through times that some might want to call the darker times or the heavier times on our planet, we became really dense into the frequency of the 3D, and the materialistic world became more of the focus than any other kind of mm, communication style is what I want to kind of put it as. So with that, we became very reliant on our language, right? Our language that we speak to others through our own bodies, right? In that way, it's voice. And so, with that having become such a prominent way of only real communication in the human perspective of things, at a collective level, I mean, of course, there's always been individuals that have been able to do this, but at the same point, it was not the collectively known thing, right? And so we have moved through a lot of years where our voice and our language was the only way of real, true communication. I mean, yes, we have body language. Of course, we some of us got good at sort of paying attention more to body language than the words, all those little bits and pieces, but they're very fractionated to actually what is a capable possibility for us as communication. And part of that became really isolating, right? If we kind of look back in our times, I mean, like technology even took that to a whole nother level of isolation, right? Ironic, by the way, when they came out with social media, that they're like, you'll never be alone again. And yet, it's probably the most lonely I've ever seen a lot of people today is because of social media. They feel even more distance from people than they did before social media. So it's sort of like in the same kind of thing where we sort of forget these parts of ourselves and we become quite isolated to certain degrees. And because from there is when we can kind of start to build up something different, or we start remembering different pieces that could be actually more helpful. So our frequency on our planet now is just at a point where telepathy is becoming more natural again, and it is allowing for our bodies and the expansionness and all these integrations and all those solar flares and all those energetic updates and all the things that have been coming over the last 4 or 5 years especially, are really getting implemented now at more of a physical level. And so within that physical level comes some of these things that were just more natural to us at the 5D level, which is telepathy. So that's a little rundown of sort of how we've gotten to where we are again now, and remembering and having this sort of come back as a natural piece into our collective consciousness. Now, what's sort of happening is people that are a little bit more aware, and I promise you, if you're sitting here listening to this, you're probably already one of them. But it's one of those things too that if you're already sort of a little bit more aware of energy in your field or recognizing emotions and stuff like that, this is something that you will be able to catch happening because it feels a little like that, except it does sort of come through your own thoughts because your brain catches it as a thought, right? It's still words. A lot of us are still thinking in our own language, right? And so we're setting out that frequency. Now, it's not going to come from anywhere and everywhere, right? You're not going to just walk past a person and be like, "Oh, that's what they're thinking about." That's just it's not to that depth. Not yet. But by the time we get there, I promise I think there will be a lot more people on board with boundaries and understanding how to protect their own energy and keeping what they don't actually want to share with anybody to themselves. There will be definitely ways of doing that. And that's again, it's just all intention, right? It's like, what are you wanting to share? What are you not wanting to share? See, but the thing is like, in a way, you can see how telepathy was already sort of a natural workup because as so many, we all know now, it's so easy to read people now. It's becoming like this thing. It's like as much as they try to lie, you can't help but know that they're lying. You know what I mean? Like that bullshit meter is just way too prominent anymore. So we're already being able to read this energy at a natural level that goes far beyond somebody's words. So telepathy is sort of just like the next step from that. And when we get telepathy sort of having experiences with it, it'll be like fractionated kind of things. It might be like the odd thing here and there. But here's the thing, a lot of people are still thinking it's their own thoughts because we're not used to thinking that could have come from somewhere else, right? So if we're thinking it in our own heads, it's got to be just us in our own heads, right? A lot of us were never really taught that this was even a capability. So we don't just automatically assume that it might not be ours. And yet at the same time, it very well might not be, right? Especially if you're in a space where you're like, yeah, I'm happy, I'm good, I'm doing these things. And then all of a sudden, like this really opposite kind of thought comes through your mind or something along those lines. Now, again, it might not be the exact words from someone else, but it could be that energy frequency that your body is catching and trying now to translate into words that make sense. So it could have caught a vibe from someone that maybe was frustrated or angry, and you were happy in that exact moment, but now all of a sudden this thought comes through of like, well, I don't deserve this, or I don't deserve to feel this way, right? That's very polar opposite to maybe how you were just feeling and what you maybe were just thinking about. So it often doesn't fit in. It's sort of often very, very quick to be like either, and this is again why getting to know yourself and understanding your own boundaries and understanding your own energy is so powerful, because when these little things can happen like that, then you very quickly recognize that it's not yours, right? You just sort of caught something, and it could be through the collective. I mean, it might not even be someone that's super close to you physically, right? Because that's not how that works. It's sort of like a radio wave. So anybody could catch anything really from across the world if they wanted to, right? I mean, and again, that's the thing about this, and that's why I'm like, you can't just walk by somebody and know exactly what they're going to be thinking because it's just not the way this is working. Um, but you can kind of hopefully see now how these little leaks of things, especially when it's intense feelings, or intense thought process or opinion on something that somebody might have, and they're really projecting that out into, the world or the universe, then those are going to be probably more likely the things that are going to get kind of caught and recognized in someone else's field, possibly, right? Because they're intentionally charged in a way. And so those give it more power and more oomph to go farther and possibly be caught by somebody else in the collective consciousness. So right now it might seem really random. It might seem really one-off. It might seem, like it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, the other intense part of this is like, if there's something going on family wise or friends wise, and somebody's maybe really upset within that group, that's actually probably more of when you might catch more thoughts or more feelings and emotions from someone else, because if they're upset by something or if there's something going on, or it could even be the opposite side of the pendulum. Maybe they're super excited about something and you're really starting to feel that kind of excitement and you catch some of the odd thoughts or things that they're really excited by. But again, it might not be detailed to exactly what it is for that person. Your brain is going to try to make sense of it for you. So it might try to relate into something that caught that thought or caught that emotion, and it's going to try to put a story to it that makes more sense for you. So it might not be exactly always right now the thoughts from whatever else might be exciting to someone else, but you can kind of see how that can kind of start to work. And I mean, it's always been contagious in energy, but telepathy is a little different now, where it's becoming more intense. It's harder to ignore the fact that it's, once you sort of recognize it's not yours, your body goes, yeah, no, see, like it's not ours. So don't keep that, whatever it is, good, bad, or all in between, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's just a recognition to know that it's available now, and it's going to become more available as the years kind of go on, because it's going to become a natural source of communication at some point in time for some of us. There's going to be less and less words used because a lot of the times our words never match the frequency of what we're usually trying to get across anyway. So it's becoming this sort of gap. And so telepathy is sort of filling that gap again and being like, well, here there's a collective consciousness that we can use a different way of communicating, just like everything else in the world never lost it. But how do we implement that in a way that doesn't feel freaky or all these other pieces, right? Because in telepathy, I mean, we've only ever really known much from the movies that were kind of made, that somebody could read your mind, or, someone can invade your thoughts or invade your mind and find out these things or find memories or do whatever. I mean, it's all been framed into ways that maybe don't always seem so nice. But don't get me wrong. I mean, like, of course, maybe like way back in the day, if somebody really intentionally wanted to use it in a harmful way, maybe they could to a certain degree. But at the same point today, that's just not where we are. That's not the whole point of telepathy in the first place. Telepathy is just a type of communication as a oneness, as a whole. And so it just gives people understanding of each other at such a depth that it's so authentic, I guess, in a way, as I want to say it. Like, there's no way of masking telepathy at a true level, because it will always portray the truest form of that energy coming from that person. So whether it be emotion, whether it be, thought process or perspective on self or whatever might be going on, because we're the most critical on ourselves. So if anybody's going to catch anything, it might be just like, wow, that person is really beating themselves up today, those kinds of things. So that's sort of how it's showing up right now. It can be um really random, but you can also be more intentional with it. So if you have somebody that's really open to being like, hey, let's try to communicate through just our minds and see what happens. I mean, the more you practice at it, the easier you're going to find. It is easier to communicate sometimes with certain people that are, of course, open to doing so in those ways, right? It doesn't need to be picking up the phone and having the phone call. It'll be more of like dropping little things in here and there. It might not be full-blown conversation, because again, our words were used to describe very specific things or to bring forth a point of view that we had or opinion or whatever it might have been, right? So we also have to remember telepathy is more authentic in its own right of it's a pure delivery of energy. So often that other person is already going to kind of grasp what you're sort of getting across because they feel it in a way that makes sense to them at a truth level for, the frequency of that's being sent. So if you're wanting to gather or meet together or something and you show a place and a time, it'll sort of be like this yes or no answer rather than a full-blown conversation. It's not going to be people needing to explain themselves of why they can't go or why, it seems silly and mundane when I talk about it like that, but it's sort of true in the aspect of like those are such minute things that so many of us get so wrapped up into from our physical materialistic level, right? And the beliefs that were just simply given to us. So, and I mean, back in the day, a lot of us knew how to explain ourselves. If we knew how to use those words and explain ourselves well enough, we could often get what we wanted. And so, in a way, telepathy will only take it at the truest source and be able to deliver that to somebody else in a much quicker way, but also in a more agreeable way that's going to make sense on both sides of the party. So, it can be very intimate as well, because people really feel seen a lot of the time with telepathy. It makes somebody feel really understood to certain degrees sometimes because now again that information is being delivered to them through energetics rather than through someone else's words, their own perspective and their only way of seeing things, rather than having the compassion for someone else being able to see something different, even though you probably agree on it, but now you don't feel like you agree through the words, right? Because somebody's using maybe something that doesn't resonate very well with the other person. Whereas telepathy sort of cuts that down into just true form of recognizing if somebody else maybe has a different form of communicating or understanding something, then that energy is going to come to them that's going to make sense to them, right? So it cuts down on the miscommunications. It cuts down on those pieces. And that's the beautiful part, I think, behind telepathy because it is so natural. So it's a much more authentic way in some rights that we communicate because it's coming from that only intentional part of self with whatever it might be that you're trying to get across, right? So ill intentions is so easy to catch in telepathy. It's not even funny, right? Because I mean, that's what I just said is going to go with the highest intention of what's actually true for that person. So if they have true ill intentions or there's really not good intentions, you will automatically be able to tell because you will feel that. That's how it's going to come to you, right? Like you're going to know. You can't, they're not just going to be able to lie about things. And I mean, even still in today's world, like obviously telepathy is going to become something that'll be used more and more down the road, but it's going to take some time for people to sort of get on board, I think, with sort of being in more communication in those ways. And how that might look is obviously going to be a little farther out than we even need to really be talking about. But at the same point, because it's already starting to happen now, there's nothing wrong with being aware of it because it's just going to help you as the future, pieces come along. And it does almost make it easier to be more trusting in self and your own intuition because you don't need someone else to be like, oh yeah, that person, wasn't so great or they didn't have the greatest intentions and we learned the hard way, There's going to be less and less of that. So the strange part will come through when some of those people might try to start to manipulate the energy to work in their favor. But again, you'll know it because you'll feel it. It just doesn't feel good, right? And when someone's intentions don't feel good, they're probably not the greatest of intentions. So that's the other piece to this too, is it actually become a really helpful tool for less doubting of self or less being like, man, why did I fall into that? Like, look at it, it turned out like shit. Now I'm paying for the consequences of, being involved in that or whatever it might be. I mean, of course, though, there's still free will, right? I mean, there's still going to be the people that are going to want to just be like, oh, well, I see the good in everybody, even if they are maybe catching an ill intention and they just don't want to, resonate with that. But that's again, that'll be individual learning as our times go on. But for me, I think I find it actually quite exciting to be sort of reaching back into these spaces that is of more of the authentic self rather than just being a physical 3D being because it's just not who we are anyway. So the more we're able to integrate more of ourselves at an energetic level, the more expansive I feel like this life is just going to become. It's not going to be a detriment by any means. It just allows us expansion, not just as humanity for our own planet, but back up into the galactic consciousness and those connections as well. It's going to make it easier because that's almost, I know of beings that only use that kind of language. They don't even have any kind of sound that comes out of them because they're, either they're not physical enough to be able to use sound in that way, or whatever it is, right? But telepathy is super, like they would even tell us now, like from their level of understanding. And I mean, granted, our Earth chose to be in a 3D, well, to an extent, in a 3D form, in a 3D experience. And now that we're moving back out of that, back into the 5D, we're reascending in ways that, souls wanted to have that experience. So it's caveman ages are still, working their way up right now and out. But, if they were going to tell us that we're just touching into our telepathy, it's like this joke of being like, yeah, you're just finally starting to invent a phone with the super long cord, all those little funny things that we can think of even from our material world that they kind of giggle about because, we're not even touching the tip of the iceberg with what's actually available when it comes to that kind of communication. But it's a start. So, we're moving in a direction that's going to allow that expansiveness to happen as well. So there's a lot of different ways that people might want to choose to use telepathy in the future. But for right now, I would say it's just to be more aware of it. I did have an experience actually, and because of my own journey, I think I was just happened to be a little bit more aware of, especially like I said, the heightened charged emotions or charged thoughts that somebody might have towards someone else or those things. So that's where I want to touch into next, because this is where it kind of feels like, well, it feels really directed at me, or it feels like that's really charged. And now I'm recognizing I don't think that's mine. One, it's not going to be important to know exactly who it's coming from. At times you might very well know because it might be like, oh, there's no one else. It's going to have to be like that person. It wouldn't make sense for it to be anybody else coming from anybody else, right? But it doesn't matter if you know who it comes from or not. That's going to be your ego that's going to want to know that because your ego is trying to keep you safe. So it feels like somebody's throwing shade or throwing something your way that doesn't feel very nice. The ego wants to kind of go into survival mode and be like, well, whose ass do I kind of have to kick, to make us feel better again. So the ego is probably going to want to know all the time who it's coming from. But like I said, at times you might very well know exactly who it's coming from. And that's fine. If you're supposed to know, you'll know. But if you're not supposed to know, don't go looking. Because what you do in that aspect is you sort of throw yourself back into a frequency that's really restrictive and not expansive for you. Because when you go back and drive to ego first and you let him take the seat, and then it doesn't really help your own understanding or expansiveness, sorry, with telepathy in general or the changes that are actually happening on Earth, right? I mean, these changes are happening. Like there's no getting around it anymore. You're either getting on the boat or you can sit, on your paddleboard that you don't even realize is underneath your ass and fight the waves. I mean, it's up to you, but it's happening, right? So why not just become okay with kind of surrendering into the experience of understanding it is happening, but then knowing sort of like I'm allowed to set my own boundaries. I'm allowed to do a few things if I feel uncomfortable by this, and we'll definitely touch into those too here. But when it comes to maybe somebody throwing shade or throwing something your way that's quite intense, and this could again be enlightened or it might not feel so great, right? But when it comes in, it might show up again kind of as your own thought process at first. So I'll give you an example. When I first went to go move away, I had never really moved away from my family to the extent that I did for a while. And I was really excited about moving. Like for me, I was super excited about this. I was like, cool. And we're talking, this is years ago now. But because of my process and where I was in my journey and all the things, I think they wanted me to have sort of this experience with telepathy in this way. So I kept kind of catching this thought that would kind of, I'd find drift through every now and then. It was kind of a little bit elusive at first. I didn't fully know what it was attached to. But when I caught it like that, and I just happened to notice it was there, I was like, hey, what the hell is that? Like, and then the thought got clear and it was like, well, why am I leaving when everybody's still here? My family's here. I thought that was really strange. I'm like, why would I think that? Because I'm actually really excited about leaving. And I'm not going that far away, like it's still capable of visiting really whenever I wanted, if I wanted to. So I kind of analyzed it in a little different way. And I thought, this is really strange. Like, I don't feel like that's mine. That thought doesn't feel like it's my thought. It doesn't resonate with how I'm actually feeling when I think about moving. And I recognized it was coming from someone in my family that probably unconsciously was just a little sad that I was moving. And I just happened to catch that intensity, right? And I caught that thought because it was sort of being directed in my way for making a decision to move. So it can be those things as well. And that's what I mean by the intensity. It's probably more likely to catch something that's a little bit more intense than it would be necessarily as just a more neutral or just kind of passing by thought. So, and I know we're just sort of in times where the passing by thoughts might be rather intense in the non-preferable state, which means maybe it's not going to feel so great because a lot of our world um population, excuse me, is not in the best place right now, right? A lot of people are being affected by the chaos. A lot of people are not able to really see the light at the end of the tunnel right now necessarily. So the thoughts that follow those are not always, the nicest feeling thoughts, and the intensity of the emotion behind those is not always the nicest emotion. But it all needs to be let go, to a certain degree so that we can create something new. Again, if you're here listening to this, I'm sure you're already one of those people that understands we choose to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's not something that um is just going to be automatic, right? So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of sort of like what's happening with all of that right now. Now, when it comes to putting down boundaries, I mean, obviously, nobody can come flying into your head, like I said, and looking for things without you likely knowing, for one, that somebody might be poking and prodding at you. But two, you have free will. So with free will, you can choose to have more boundaries with how much you want to open up to, how much you actually want to receive, how much you want to play with this. And all you simply have to do is say that, I'm a sovereign being and I get to choose who actually is in my field and what I catch from, the collective consciousness or anything like that. So just simply stating where you're okay with, and maybe some days you want to play with it more, and that's fine. And other days you're like, you know what? I got a life I'm still trying to live. I don't really want to be dealing with all these extra thoughts. I have enough of my own right now? So, and that's totally fine. And it's just remembering too that like you do have choice to the communication styles. And sometimes communication telepathy is just going to be supernatural between people. And you might not even realize that you're actually opening up to that telepathic communication style because your frequency soul level might be just so resonant that it feels really comfortable to just kind of naturally do that, right? I don't know if you've ever met anybody that you've been like, I don't know, they just seem to kind of like read my mind. We don't really actually have to have a lot of words. And that's what people want to chalk up to being like super sacred or really beautiful. It's like, oh, don't lose that. Hold on to that all you can, because it's rare. It's not really rare. It's just something that we never really noticed was actually normal to have interactions like that. So those are also ways of telepathically kind of communicating, right? With someone being in their field, or you don't feel like you have to use a lot of words with them. So you're naturally already kind of sharing energy exchanges that make sense to both sides of the party, right? Okay, so you can set boundaries. You can turn it up, you can turn it down. Just know if you're turning it up, it's still a work in progress right now. There's not enough people that are totally aware of this. So if you do find other people that are super open, you want to practice, you want to try, then I would say start trying to send images or single words, and seeing what that other person is sort of catching from that, because that will allow you to understand like how strong it is. And then you can kind of, keep practicing and going deeper from there if you wish. Again, all choice though. You don't have to do that. It's just to recognize that no matter what, it's happening. So a couple of the other cards that actually came out for this topic was Divine Matrix, which is Galactic Mushroom. Excuse me, Galactic Mushroom card. And this is really that divine piece, right? Like where they're sort of acknowledging the fact that the more that our telepathy grows and becomes a normal thing again, and yes, I will touch a little bit on the ancient stuff on this too, because why not? Let's just hit every aspect of this. The Galactic Mushroom Divine Matrix, it's really sort of like us plugging back in a different way of communicating with off our planet and becoming part of a community again. It's not just us, right? Even for everything on our planet, our plants, animals, all the other things, like our connection with that is just going to grow the more that we are expanding into using telepathy again. So just so you know, it's a big shift, but it almost makes things easier again. Like I said, the communication style, it's not like you're going to a whole nother country and you have no idea how to really get anything across. And I know something cool. As our telepathy abilities grow again and we remember more of how to actually integrate that as the years go on here, you will be able to go to a whole nother country that doesn't speak your specific language and you don't speak theirs, but telepathy will be delivered in a way that will make sense to them. So you don't need to speak the same language. It's like I actually had someone ask me once, I had a lady ask me, she said, well, my grandmother was Spanish and, or yeah, she only spoke Spanish. She never spoke English here. And she wanted to have a reading done with her grandmother. And I said, oh, that doesn't matter at all. And she was really surprised by that because she didn't understand how she was going to be able to speak to me if she only spoke Spanish and I only spoke English. So it was that really cool thing that I was able to describe to her that it doesn't matter from our physical level. It might matter, right? Because we're here still, but when we go over back to the other side, they're communicating through energy. They're not giving me the language. I'm translating it into the language. And so she thought that was really fascinating, but sort of can think of telepathy being the same way. All right. So, and then another card was lost in space and needing direction. Now, this is maybe how some people might start to feel, especially if they're not becoming a little bit more aware of this happening, because it is going to make you feel a little bit off kilter at times, especially if somebody's not aware of it, right? Or if they're not even aware of themselves and they really haven't even been listening to their own emotions, or they don't even know what's theirs, what's not theirs, and they have no baseline. You might see some people get really I don't want to say affected, but a little like confused. It's almost like they're gonna stop trusting themselves to like a whole different degree when they're talking to somebody. It's like you'll kind of notice they might get really picky with their words or unable to share in a way that maybe they used to share, right? Because it's gonna almost make them feel like because they don't know what's theirs, what's not theirs, they don't know how to even express what is theirs anymore because they sort of start to lose that sense of self in a way because they're kind of getting thrown into the deep end at that point. And honestly, guys, like this is going to happen even later in 2026. I keep telling everybody, like, if you are not on the fucking horse yet, get on the horse because she's going to take you for a wild ride. And as telepathy continues to grow and it gets stronger, it's not going to be fun for some people if they are not sort of aware that this is even a thing. So it's going to be really challenging to certain people and feeling lost. Yeah. And I think that's why they wanted to bring that lost in space. And the other words on here are needing direction. And they'll kind of naturally end up in front of people that would probably be able to help them with that. And again, being able to know and understand telepathy is a thing, you can actually feel into somebody's field and be like, are you feeling a little lost? Are you feeling a little stranded or challenged right now? And you feel like you can't even trust your own thought process anymore. And someone's like, oh my God, yeah, you nailed it. That's probably just somebody a little bit struggling with maybe what's been going on and they're not totally aware. So just even simply having a conversation with them. You don't have to mention telepathy right off the get-go. They might be like, oh, that's a little much over my head. But even just the factor of recognizing, you just say communication styles are changing, like people's intentions, you can feel them differently. Do you know if you're carrying other people's emotions? Half the time they're going to tell you, no, I didn't even know that was the thing, right? So it's just sometimes having slight conversations with them to help them understand that they're not going crazy, that there is a lot of things that have been changing lately. And that'll be very helpful. So the other thing that telepathy is also really pushing is ego sublimation. And that's the card actually that came out as well. And I do feel like that is so very true because in a way now, with telepathy coming back more into play again, our dissolving of the ego is really going to start to happen at a whole nother level because we are not going to be able to convince people, especially people that are aware, or especially people that have become aware with telepathy or the energy and just generally reading people, again, from a very natural level of energy. We are not going to be able to have people convince us or you convince somebody else that your comfort zone, whatever it is that it's leading you towards, to disregard or try and skirt around, or you don't want to be comfortable, or sorry, you want to be comfortable, you don't want to be in the unknown or uncomfortable. So we start, making up excuses or blaming stuff, and that victim mindset, like the victim mindset is going to be so easy to see through because that energy is just not going to lie, right? People are just going to know you're just super uncomfortable. And it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to convince people with anymore, right? I mean, we all, I'm sure, have known certain people that are like really good at using their words to convince somebody, even if it was like total opposite of maybe what was going on inside them, right? We've all known people that could do that, but it was easier to do before because your word was kind of the thing that we all had to just sort of take. You know what I mean? It wasn't so much of a way, especially as individuals, that we could easily see through and just simply take somebody's intention pure as it is through energy, because that energy was harder to see. People were a lot denser before. If you want to know something fascinating, if you went back 300 to 350 years, even from right now in our time, they would not be able to see us. They would probably think that we were like some kind of light being or alien because we are so bright compared to what they were at that point in time on Earth. They were way denser of energy than we are today, right? So, I mean, these things are becoming easier. But the thing is, too, it's sort of becoming undeniable. It's not really letting you run away from the things that do make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not denying that there are people can have terrible ill intentions on this planet, but that's also a part of our duality. We know both sides of that exist. So trying to run from understanding, oh my gosh, maybe that's really not somebody I ever really knew. They're just really good at manipulating words or manipulating people to believe certain things about them, and all of a sudden you kind of start seeing it for truth, that doesn't always feel really good. It kind of gives us a blow to our self reliance of thinking you could read people before. And it's nothing to be upset by. But this is also where that telepathy thing is helpful, because it just gives you a better baseline than trying to sit with it for too long, or trying to weigh the pros and cons of being like, do I got this or do I not? I mean, my gut's saying one thing, I don't know, my body's, and we kind of go back and forth a lot. Whereas that telepathy part is just instantaneously going to send that energetic frequency, right, to all of us. And then we can interpret it from there. And some of us are just going to be like, you know what, I just don't resonate with that person. It doesn't mean there's anything ill intent about that person at all, but that is frequency matches at a soul level. Some of us are just not going to resonate with other people, and that's supposed to happen. Okay. We're all in different frequencies from soul level, from all of our experiences, souls, all of it. And it's supposed to be that way because that's what creates learning on our planet. That's what creates expansiveness here. And so we're not all going to resonate all together all the time, and we're not supposed to. And if you're friends with someone that resonates okay with that other person and you don't resonate with that person, there's nothing wrong with that either, right? Because obviously maybe their soul frequency or there's something there, either a lesson or something going on for them. So it's not to have any judgment by any means if you're just like, I don't know, I just don't resonate with some of these people, or I don't resonate with that, or I don't resonate with this. I mean, I get people all the time that say, what's your opinion on that? And I said, well, I'll give you my perspective, but that's my resonancy. And I want you to pick your truth out of that, because whatever I give you is not just universal truth, even in this stuff. Like, I want you to pick what resonates for you, and whatever doesn't, just leave it behind, because that's the whole point, right? I just want everybody to understand that it's okay to do that. There's no right or wrong or, one universal truth for every single person. There are certain things that you're going to find a lot of people agreeing on, right? Because at a soul level, we do know there is certain truths for our planet or our history here or things like that that very well resonate with pretty much all of us, because we know and understand to a certain level. But the perspective of it, maybe coming down to individual situations or things that have happened here, we will have a different resonancy with, right? And that's totally fine. But it's not to say that person's wrong, or that history's wrong, or this or that's wrong. There's no such thing. That came from patriarchal systems that want to control, right? They used it to their advantage to control. So telepathy is sort of bringing back this part of ourselves that's pretty unshakable. And when we become unshakable in who we are as an individual, we become unshakable at a collective level too. And that becomes really powerful, because it allows us then to start working as a more well-oiled machine again. And we're not fighting each other, and we're not, disregarding each other for all these things. And now I'm talking probably more future here. But at the same point, I think it's closer than people think it is, as a possibility and as a reality in general. So again, I want you to know and understand the light at the end of the tunnel is also closer than we all think. For a lot of people, as much as we can all have some pretty intense days, but it's just, remember, it's just that day. You have another moment, because every morning you still wake up in this experience. You still get another chance to have another experience. So the gratitude that comes with just even knowing how much fun it gets to be, that we're remembering things like telepathy and it's being brought back into our world again, is so expansive. It's saying to us, like, we have made decision at a collective conscious level and our planet that has now actually proceeded to start making this a more physical thing again. And when you know physical reality is starting to align with what we have known was possible or things like that at an energetic level, and you know that reality in the physical sense is starting to align with that, you know that that's strong. It takes a good collective of people. Actually, it's about 1% of the entire population on the planet. That's all it takes to make a shift happen. And 1% really isn't that much when you start to think about it. So there's enough people that have opened up that are allowing this ascension process to truly start happening. And that's exciting. It is exciting. We get to remember pieces again now. And again, this is going to come in handy when some of that knowledge starts to come back, ancient knowledge, ancient history, things that have happened here, how the ancients actually used to live. And let's touch on that now that I've brought that back up again. So back in ancient times, telepathy was not an uncommon thing. They actually would have thought it uncommon to not have that kind of ability to connect and communicate, right? So back in those days, telepathy was used in a lot of different ways. It was almost like, and again, this is maybe where some people are like, "Ooh, I don't know, it kind of seems creepy because that's hive mind thinking." And that's actually not true because in a hive mind, a lot of them don't have the same kind of free will that we do, right? It's a collective consciousness that chose to have that experience as a hive mind. So they do function differently and they do function more as a one rather than individual person in a collective of a hive, right? If you really think about a beehive, right? And you know that they all have their jobs and they all do their things and they work in tandem so well together. It's almost uncanny, right? And it almost does feel like that there is no kind of individualistic because there isn't really, because that's not the way that they were designed to work. Hive mind working together in those ways means that the frequency of all of those bees work really well together to create and get to a common goal. So with our telepathy, the common goal back in those days used to be a way of communicating that could go beyond just where you were, right? When someone could be like across the world and you would still be able to learn from each other and share ideas and get to, yeah, probably a common goal, which probably was like survival or whatever resources or whatever might have been looking for back in those days, right? And yet they didn't need all this extra technology to make that happen. So it was really powerful because it was sort of this way of communicating that allowed for a lot more expansiveness and growth to happen than everybody sort of being on different pages and never being able to sort of bridge those gaps, where we see that a lot in our own societies now, right? So with those types of things, it was a very normal way of communication. Now, it wasn't even just communication here on Earth. I mean, that was how they would communicate with other beings, with other ships, with other things going on. They telepathy to a certain degree. But here's the thing: this is where the parameters of this might get a little in depth, but they would still like my teams are kind of obviously they use this in their own right to certain degrees, depending on where they are in their lives. But they're just telling me too, like telepathically they were so involved in certain ways that if they knew somebody was it was sort of like still answering the phone, right? Like for us we have to just still decide, like we see who's calling and we decide whether we want to answer that or not. It's still kind of the same way telepathy will work. It's like you kind of know somebody at a soul level frequency, you kind of know who that is. It's like our caller ID, right? And then they kind of go, okay, well, a lot of the time it's not coming from personal preference though. If they don't seem to answer a call, it's usually, or open up a link is what they'll call it, is usually because there may not be anything there to benefit both sides, right? And if there's not really anything there as a win-win, then they are not likely just going to pick up the call from some stranger on some planet because they're curious, right? And so you can even probably see that happen in meditation sometimes. I'm sure you've gone in meditation asking questions, you got no answer. It doesn't, they're not here to sort of feed any kind of ego. So if it's in a capacity where they truly need help or they're looking for something or they're in tandem working together, I mean, that's a whole different, scenario. But it's not ever in a way that is I can't even describe it because it's so far out from where we are right now, but it's a really interesting way of communication because there was so many less words used in a physical sense of any kind. Those words were used more on Earth. In certain ways, they were using words to connect with other pieces on our planet, other, lives, living things, animals, plants. And sometimes they would use verbal communication to help open links into those other consciousness for other people to understand and learn from. Okay. So it's like someone, if we went to school and we're trying to learn something and somebody handed you the textbook, that's sort of why the odd bit of language might have been used, or pictures, right? I mean, you look at pictograms from way back when they were using more pictures than they would have been even words. So symbolism, same kind of deal, but we just turned them into words, if that makes sense. So in those ways, it's kind of how it used to be used a lot in the other ancient times. Now, when our planet and we had the shift change in DNA and they created us into what we are today, the telepathic part of self was too limited now to be full connected to some of those ancient beings. Okay. So it is sort of like if there's somebody that doesn't really fully, not able to connect in that kind of full capacity way, then obviously other things are going to need to be done. So language, for one, started to be created to a certain degree because they needed that to be able to communicate and bridge that gap between the telepathy and telepathic links and what we weren't just totally quite capable of. They sort of progressed us really, really quickly. So there was no like bridge of being like, here, this is what you're going to learn. It was kind of, we just kind of got thrown into it, right? So when you kind of get thrown into the deep end, we didn't always have all the pieces we needed necessarily. So that's why I'm saying as human, we're bringing that back from ancient times. It's not ever really anything that was 100% usable to the extent that we know it could be, even in these bodies, because it was just not something that was, to a degree we understood energy, we could read energy. That's why you could always kind of, you got those people that were really good at reading emotions and all those things, because those were still parts of it. It just wasn't like the full textbook that was quite given to us, right? So we've had to work our way up from regular language, verbal language, to now back into the energetics. So there you go, big old rundown of telepathy for you. But I hope you have fun with it. I hope you don't feel freaked out by that, especially now I've given you what I possibly can from my own experience and understanding and all the things I found. But again, like I said, I want you to take your truth out of that and I want you to go run with that, because your truth is more important than saying or putting me on, on the stage and saying, well, this has got to be right because she's saying it. I don't want you to ever feel like that. I want you to come and pick your truth. So if you love this kind of stuff, if you want to be a part of my community, my membership community, it is a monthly subscribed community. We have so much fun. We meet twice a month on a live call. You can ask questions. We do meditations. We do energy healings. We do all the fun things. So if you want more information on that, check the link below in the description, and I will see you on the next one.